Welcome back, everyone. In this lecture, we're going to go and have a high-level overview of the course curriculum. That way you can understand how the course is structured, and more importantly, if you already know some topics that are in the course curriculum, you can understand which sections to skip and where you can just dive in. So let's get started. Here are the major topics in the course curriculum. I'm going to go through them one by one. Keep in mind, some of these major topics are then divided further into subsections. So after going through this course curriculum, you should understand everything that we teach in the course, as well as if you already know something, where to jump in further along the course. So we start off with an introduction section. That's actually the section you're in right now. It's the course overview lecture, this lecture describing the course curriculum, the FAQ lecture, which is just an article lecture with some useful links and frequently asked questions. And remember, if you're ever looking for the course files, they're available as a zip file here, either in the FAQ lecture or in the course overview lecture, the one previous to this one that said don't skip. Okay, so you should already have an understanding of where to find your notes by the time you're viewing this lecture. Then we have a couple of sections that I'm going to label as a front-end crash course. Essentially, we have three major crash courses for the front-end material, and that's a crash course on HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap 4. Now, many users, especially if you've already done previous web development, you may be already familiar with those front-end concepts. So if you are, please feel free to skip according to your skill level. Each of these crash courses does have some sort of project exercise at the end of it. So if you want to make sure that your understanding is up to par with what we teach here in the course, you can always just skip ahead to those project exercises, check them out, and then see if you can pass them. So we're going to cover those three main topics, HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. Those are really just the basic level you need to know in order to continue on in learning about Python and Flask. So once we go through those front-end crash courses, they're pretty short sections each. Then we have a larger section, which is just an overall Python crash course, essentially a mini Python course inside of this entire Flask course. And we've broken this up into two levels because it's very likely that someone already has Python experience if they're interested in learning Flask. So I divided it up into basic Python and then advanced Python. The basic Python, that discusses things from the very basics, such as objects, data types, very basic data structures, how to perform control flow like if and else statements, and then it ends up talking about functions. So if you already understand that stuff and you already know how to create a function with Python, you may be able to skip that first level of basic Python. Then level 2, that's a more advanced section on Python that discusses things like object-oriented programming, decorators, and how to create your own modules. Those kind of ideas are necessary to fully understand the Flask web framework. So maybe you have a little bit of basic Python, you know how to create basic functions, but you haven't learned about things like decorators or object-oriented programming, then you can jump into the advanced Python section and check that all out. Okay, so after that entire section on Python, those two sections, then we actually start learning about Flask. So we'll start off with the very basics of Flask, essentially an overview of Flask applications, and we're really going to focus here on how to route a Flask application to show different web pages on your actual web app. Then we have a couple of sections on building out this idea of basic Flasks, and there are three really important sections, and we'll divide it up into templates, forms, and databases. So the template section, that's going to show you how to actually connect the HTML files and essentially all that front-end stuff to Flask. And then we'll also cover Jinja templating there, so you can directly send information from Flask to the front end of your website. Then the next section, we'll talk about forms, essentially how to create forms with Flask for input. We talk about HTML forms in the front end crash course section, but then this shows you how you can easily create those forms with Flask automatically. Then after that, we talk about databases. Essentially, once you actually get input from a form, how do you save that to an SQL database so you can retrieve it later on? So we talk all about databases in that third section. Now, by the time you're finished with this section, you actually understand how to make a basic website. You understand how to take in user information, save it, report it back. So by the time you're done with Flask basics, templates, forms, and databases, you already have a ton of knowledge of how to actually create real web applications. So then where we start talking about our more advanced topics, such as how to actually structure larger Flask applications. So the previous lectures before this, they're going to talk more simplified applications, but here we're really going to have an in-depth discussion on how we utilize something called blueprints to organize Flask applications that can scale to a much larger structure. Then we talk about things like user authentication, so we'll have a whole section on that. And those are things like user registration, user logins, just general authentication practices such as storing passwords, and we'll even talk about OAuth for outside authorization. Those are the kind of things when you go to a website and it says log in with Facebook or log in with Google or log in with Twitter. That's called authorization, so you basically let another website handle your authorization. We're going to show you how to do that with something like Twitter to log into the website in case you don't want to implement your own registration or login practice. Then we get to a very large portion of the course, which is a huge social network project, essentially taking everything we've learned so far, including the front end, the Python, the Flask, and all that good stuff, and we create a very large project that has going to have a lot of those important features all together. So we'll talk about having multiple users, authenticating them, how to register new users to your website, how to connect all those users to an SQL database, how to use blueprints, how to have posts, and how users can follow other users. So all those little details, and we'll have that all in a very large project. So you're going to learn a lot, and it'll be a really nice review as you code along, and it's going to be an awesome project that you can later show on to either your friends or your colleagues. Then after that, we talk about some more esoteric topics which you may or may not need depending on the scale of your website. And those are going to be things like talking about REST APIs, so you can create a RESTful interface for your website, and also other things like how to accept payments with Stripe. So maybe you do or don't want to actually accept money for your website, but we'll show you how to do that anyways in some of these more little advanced topics. And those are going to be shorter sections since they're a little more advanced and you may or may not need them. Okay, and that's really essentially the entire course curriculum, kind of a broad level here. And as you go throughout the course, we'll dive into much better detail about all those little individual topics. All right, if you have any questions on where is a good fit for you to jump forward in the course, if you already feel familiar with some of these topics, feel free to post the Q&A in forums or send me a message. I'm always happy to help you find a good starting point. Thanks, and up next, we'll talk about just in general how a website works. Okay, we'll see you there.